It is November 12th, 2007. On newsstands across the United States, the new cover of Forbes magazine shows a smiling executive holding a mobile phone, and the headline asks a question that sounds almost rhetorical. Nokia. 1 billion customers. Can anyone catch the cell phone king? At this exact moment, Nokia sells roughly 4 out of every 10 mobile phones on planet Earth. It operates in more than 150 countries. It is the beating heart of an entire national economy. The surface is calm. The numbers are record-breaking. The king looks untouchable. 6 years later, almost to the day, that entire phone business is sold to Microsoft for 5.44 billion euros, roughly $7 billion. Less than Nokia used to earn in profit in a single good year. 2 years after that, Microsoft writes off the whole acquisition and eliminates nearly 8,000 jobs. The king is not caught. The king is erased. And here is the detail that should keep you awake tonight. The paper trail shows Nokia saw the future coming a full decade before it arrived. Engineers held it in their hands. Management looked at it, and then they buried it. Welcome to Business Archaeology. Today, we are conducting a forensic audit of the fastest peacetime destruction of corporate wealth the modern world has ever recorded, the fall of Nokia. In this audit, we will expose the buried prototype, the secret device Nokia built years before the iPhone existed, and the reason it never left the vault. We will deconstruct the 1,300-word internal memo that leaked to the world and the single 40-minute press conference 2 days later that vaporized billions of dollars of shareholder value before lunch. We will analyze the scientific study, 76 sworn insider accounts, that revealed the real killer was not Apple and it was not Google. And we will follow the money to the one man who walked out of the wreckage $25 million richer while an entire country was left holding the bill. Because this is not just a story about phones. It is a story about what happens when an empire mistakes its own reflection for the horizon. And the same mechanism is running right now inside the retirement account you think is safe. Let us open the ledger. To understand what died in Finland, we first have to excavate 2 older graves. Because Nokia was not the first empire to be handed a map of its own destruction and to file it away. Travel back to the summer of 1501. We are standing on the Rialto, the commercial heart of the Republic of Venice, the richest square mile in Europe. For 3 centuries, Venice has held a near monopoly on the most valuable trade flow in the known world: spices. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, moving from India through the ports of Alexandria and Beirut onto Venetian galleys and into the kitchens and pharmacies of Europe at staggering markups. Venice does not merely participate in this trade. Venice is the trade. Its fleets, its banks, its insurance contracts, its diplomatic treaties, an entire operating system built on one assumption: that spices must pass through the Mediterranean and therefore through Venice. Then a merchant banker named Girolamo Priuli sits down at his desk and records in his private diary a piece of news that has just arrived in the city. Portuguese ships have returned to Lisbon loaded with pepper. Not overland, not through Alexandria. Around the bottom of Africa, the sea route Vasco da Gama had opened when he reached Calicut on the coast of India. In May of 1498, Priuli understands instantly what most of his fellow citizens refuse to see. He writes that this news is worse for Venice than a lost war, that if the spice trade is torn away, it will be, in his words, like taking the milk from a newborn child. And how does the Venetian establishment respond? With denial. Patricians argue the Portuguese route is a stunt. The voyage is too long, the ships will sink, the spices will arrive spoiled, the quality is inferior, the customer will never accept it. Every one of those objections is technically reasonable. Every one of them is strategically irrelevant. Some Venetians even float a genuinely visionary countermove. Historical accounts describe discussions with Egypt's rulers about cutting a canal through Suez to shorten the old route 4 centuries before it was actually dug. Brilliant idea, never executed. Innovation on paper is not innovation. Within a few years, spice arrivals at Alexandria collapse. Venice does not vanish overnight. That is the cruelest part of this pattern. The Republic stays wealthy for decades, living off accumulated capital, throwing better parties than ever, but it stops compounding. It stops being the future and becomes a museum of its own past. The lagoon that once commanded the world's trade routes ends up selling its citizens' former glory to tourists. Remember that arc. You are going to see it again in Espoo, Finland. Now, move the dial forward. It is 1876, New York City. The offices of the Western Union Telegraph Company, by most accounts, the most powerful communications monopoly in American history. Western Union controls the wires. The overwhelming majority of long-distance messages in the United States move through its network. Its president, William Orton, is one of the most respected executives in the country. If information is money, and it is, Orton sits on the vault. That year, according to the story told for decades afterward, a lawyer named Gardner Green Hubbard approaches Western Union with an offer: the patents of his son-in-law, a young teacher of the deaf named Alexander Graham Bell, for $100,000. The device is called the telephone. The details of the meeting are contested. This is one of those episodes where legend has grown over the ledger, but the outcome is not contested at all. Western Union passed. The telephone, the thinking reportedly went, was little more than an electrical toy, a novelty. Who would want to speak over a wire when a telegram was clean, written, and professional? Watch what happens next, because this is the part everyone forgets. Within 2 years, Western Union realizes its mistake, and it does not sit still. It hires the two best electrical minds in America, Thomas Edison and Elisha Gray, and builds its own telephones. In some respects, better ones, Edison's transmitter outperforms Bell's early design. The Bell Company, small and nearly broke, does the only thing it can. In 1878, it sues the giant for patent infringement, and in November 1879, Western Union settles. It agrees to withdraw from the telephone business entirely in exchange for a share of Bell's rental income for 17 years. On paper, it looks shrewd. Get paid to surrender. Keep the margins on the telegraph, the business that was profitable today, and let someone else gamble on tomorrow. Now read the last line of that ledger. In 1909, the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, the direct corporate descendant of that electrical toy, purchased working control of Western Union itself. The toy bought the empire. And on January 27th, 2006, Western Union quietly discontinued its telegram service forever. The same decade, almost the same season, in which Nokia's market value was reaching its final peak. The wire that once ruled a continent went silent at the precise moment history was loading the same trap for someone else. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Look at the rhyme scheme. A monopolist sees the disruptive technology early, has the money, the engineers, the distribution to own it, chooses the fat margins of the present over the uncertain profits of the future, panics late, negotiates a surrender, and dresses the surrender up as strategy. Venice ran that script in 1501. Western Union ran it in 1879. And between 2007 and 2013, in a glass headquarters on the shore of the Baltic Sea, Nokia ran it line by line, as if reading from the same buried playbook. Let us walk the crime scene. The date the system broke is January 9th, 2007. Moscone Center, San Francisco. Steve Jobs walks onto a stage and holds up a slab of glass. No keyboard, mediocre battery. A slow 2G connection, a price tag of $499 with a contract. In Espoo, Nokia's engineers take it apart, and by every metric on their spec sheets, they are unimpressed. And here is the uncomfortable truth every good investigator must admit: on the specs, they were right. Nokia's phones had better cameras, better battery life, better durability, and could survive being dropped down a stairwell. Senior Nokia figures reportedly dismissed the iPhone as a niche product for a niche market, the same word Western Union's men used in spirit about the telephone, a toy. The market seemed to agree. Through the end of 2007, Nokia's share of global handset sales stood at roughly 40% in an all-time high. Revenue was growing. The Forbes cover was on the newsstands. Every dashboard in the executive suite glowed green, but market share is a lagging indicator. It tells you who won the last war. It is the corporate equivalent of starlight. By the time you see it shining, the source may already be dead. The calm surface of 2007 was not health. It was an illusion with a delay timer. Because here is the first piece of buried evidence, and it is devastating. In July 2012, the Wall Street Journal published the results of its own excavation into Nokia's archives. What it reported should have triggered a shareholder revolt years earlier, more than a decade before the iPhone. In the late 1990s, Nokia had developed and internally demonstrated a mobile phone with a large color touchscreen and internet connectivity. Its designers had also built a tablet computer concept years before the iPad. Nokia's own consumer research had flagged exactly where the market was heading. And over the following decade, the company poured an enormous sum into research and development, reported at roughly $40 billion, several times what Apple spent in the same period. Understand what this means for our audit. Nokia was not blind. Nokia photographed the future, filed the photographs in a drawer, and locked the drawer. The prototypes were judged too expensive, too risky, too likely to cannibalize the machine that was printing money that quarter. So the question every forensic audit must answer is not what happened. It is why the people inside who knew said nothing that mattered. And on this point, we are not guessing. After the collapse, two management researchers, Kwai Hui of the business school INSEAD and Timo Vuori, conducted one of the most remarkable postmortems in corporate history. In-depth interviews with 76 Nokia executives, managers, and engineers from board level down. Their published findings read less like a business study and more like the psychology of a failing regime. Middle managers knew Symbian, Nokia's aging operating system, was years behind Apple's software. They also knew that delivering bad news upward was a career-ending act in Nokia's culture. So they filtered it. They reported optimistic schedules they privately doubted. Top executives, in turn, terrified of disappointing investors, kept demanding faster results rather than honest ones. And the study describes senior leaders shouting at the top of their lungs at the bearers of inconvenient truths. Fear flowed down. Fiction flowed up. The researchers called one aspect of it temporal myopia. The whole organism became structurally incapable of seeing past the next quarter. This is the silent theft at the heart of the Nokia case. Before a single dollar of shareholder value was stolen by competition, the truth itself was being embezzled internally, skimmed off every status report, every roadmap, every board deck, year after year. And while the fiction flowed upward, Symbian rotted. It had fractured into a maze of incompatible versions. Building one new phone model reportedly consumed years of engineering effort, while Apple shipped a better iPhone every single June. Nokia was fighting an annual war with a supply chain of excuses. Meanwhile, the money, as it always does, quietly told the real story long before the headlines did. Unit market share stayed flat. But industry analysts tracking profits, most famously the analyst Horace Didiu, documented a migration that should have set off every alarm in ESPU. By 2010 and 2011, Apple, with only a small fraction of the world's phone unit sales, was estimated to be capturing half or more of the entire industry's profits. Nokia was still shipping hundreds of millions of devices and keeping less and less of the money. It was winning the war for volume and losing the war for value. Most people will never look at that chart. You just did. And once you have seen it, you can never again confuse biggest with safest. And while the profits migrated, Nokia opened a second front against itself. Inside the company, two rival operating systems fought for the same engineers, the same budgets, and the same future. The aging Symbian, which the volume business depended on, and a next-generation Linux-based system, eventually called MeeGo, that was perpetually 2 years from readiness. The Hui and Vuori interviews describe the consequence. Teams competing internally instead of against Cupertino. Resources split. deadlines slipping, and carriers, the phone companies who actually stocked the shelves, losing patience. An empire at war with itself does not need a foreign invader. It only needs time. By September 2010, the board finally acted, and this is where the audit turns from tragedy towards something darker. Nokia hired its first ever non-Finnish chief executive, Stephen Elop, a Canadian, recruited directly from Microsoft, where he had run the Office division. The House veterans saw what was coming. Anssi Vanjoki, the longtime Nokia executive many insiders expected to get the top job, resigned within days and told the Financial Times that switching to Google's Android would be like Finnish boys who, in his words, pee in their pants for warmth in winter. Relief now, worse cold later. Keep that quote in mind. Nokia was about to choose a third option that made wet trousers look like strategy. In early February 2011, a memo written by Elop to Nokia's staff leaked to the press, and it remains one of the most extraordinary documents in the corporate archaeological record. He described a man on a burning oil platform in the North Sea, forced to leap into freezing waters. "I have learned that we are standing on a burning platform," he wrote of Nokia itself. He admitted what the fiction-filled status reports never had. The first iPhone shipped in 2007, and we still don't have a product that is close to their experience. And then the sentence that belongs in a museum: "We poured gasoline on our own burning platform." As a diagnosis, it was honest, brutally, admirably honest. As a public document, it was gasoline of a different kind. In a single leak, the chief executive had told every customer, every carrier, and every app developer on Earth that Nokia's current products were standing on a doomed platform. 2 days later, on February 11th, 2011, in London, Elop stood beside Microsoft's chief executive, Steve Ballmer, and announced the leap. Nokia would abandon its own software and bet its entire smartphone future on Microsoft's Windows Phone, the operating system of his former employer, an operating system with barely any market share. Not Android, the platform that was actually winning. Windows Phone, Nokia's, shares fell roughly 14% that single day. The market had performed its own instant audit, and its verdict was written in red. What followed is known to students of business history as the Osborne effect. Announce that your current product line is the walking dead before its replacement exists, and customers simply stop buying immediately. Symbian phone sales did not decline gracefully to fund the transition, as the plan assumed. They collapsed. Nokia's smartphone market share, still around a third of the world at the end of 2010, disintegrated into single digits within roughly 2 years, while the first Lumia phones arrived late into a Windows ecosystem that app developers had no reason to support because it had no users, and no users because it had no apps. A house of cards does not fall one card at a time. Nokia's New York listed shares, which had touched above $60 in the summer of 2000, traded below $2 by July 2012. 97% of the peak gone. And buried in the rubble of that transition lies one final exhibit, perhaps the saddest artifact in the entire excavation. In June 2011, Nokia unveiled the N9, a buttonless all-screen phone running MeGo with a swipe-based interface that reviewers praised as genuinely beautiful. Some called it the best hardware Nokia had ever built. The world's technology press was stunned. Here, at last, was proof that the old engineering soul was still alive, and it had already been sentenced to death. Elop had committed the company to Windows Phone months earlier, and he stated publicly that there would be no successor to the N9 even if it succeeded. The phone was released into a handful of smaller markets and quietly abandoned. Read that again the way an auditor must. In the same year its future depended on winning back the world's affection, Nokia produced a phone the world actually loved and refused to sell it. Corporations like empires rarely die of a single wound. They die when the immune system starts attacking the healthy tissue. The end came with paperwork. On September 3rd, 2013, Microsoft announced it would acquire Nokia's entire devices and services business. The phones, the factories, tens of thousands of employees, the whole century-spanning legend that began in 1865 as a wood pulp mill on the Nokian Virta River for 5.44 billion euros. On the day the deal closed in April 2014, the largest phone maker the world had ever known ceased to exist as an independent business. And in July 2015, Microsoft recorded a write-down of $7.6 billion on the acquisition, more than it had paid, and cut 7,800 jobs. The empire had not merely been sold cheap, it had been sold for less than nothing. Now, follow the money, because in every collapse, someone walks out of the rubble with clean shoes. Stephen Elop's contract contained a change of control clause. When the company he ran was sold after its value had fallen catastrophically on his watch, that clause triggered a payout reported at 18.8 million euros, roughly $25 million, with Microsoft covering about 70% of it. Finland erupted. Newspapers demanded answers. Politicians called the arrangement indefensible. A bitter theory spread that Elop had been a Trojan horse sent from Redmond all along. Let the record be precise. No evidence of any conspiracy has ever been produced, and this audit alleges none. But here is the forensic point, and it is sharper than any conspiracy. No conspiracy was required. The incentive structure, signed and notarized in advance, paid the chief executive tens of millions for an outcome in which shareholders lost tens of billions. The system did not fail him. The system worked exactly as written for him. When you audit a disaster, do not ask who was evil, ask who was paid. And who held the bill? An entire nation. At its height, Nokia alone generated roughly 4% of Finland's entire economic output, around a fifth of its exports, and at times, some 70% of the value of the Helsinki Stock Exchange. It was, by some accounts, nearly a quarter of the country's corporate tax revenue in its best years. 5.5 million people had, without ever voting on it, become shareholders in a single company's judgment. When Nokia's phone business died, Finland's economy stagnated for the better part of a decade, a downturn economists still dissect. That is what concentration risk looks like when it detonates. Not a red day on a stock chart, but a hole in a nation's pension math. Which brings the excavation to your doorstep. Because if you are quietly telling yourself that this is a story about fins and phones, look at your own retirement account. As of the mid-2020s, by most estimates, the 10 largest companies make up roughly 2/5 of the entire S&P 500, a level of concentration not seen in generations. Every index fund, every target date retirement product, every diversified portfolio in the Western world is now, in significant part, a bet that today's handful of trillion-dollar kings cannot fall. That is precisely what every Finnish pension fund believed in 2007, while the Forbes cover smiled from the newsstand. No one at Nokia thought it could happen either. The mechanism does not care what the incumbent makes spices, telegrams, phones, or artificial intelligence. It only cares that the incumbent believes its own market share. So let us translate this audit from the boardroom to your kitchen table, because that is where collapses are actually paid for. You carry Nokia risk in 3 places, whether you know it or not. The first is your employer. Thousands of Nokia employees held their salary, their stock options, their pension contributions, and their professional identity in one single entity. When the platform burned, they lost all 4 at once. In towns like Salo, where Nokia's Finnish phone factory closed, the local economy did not read about the disruption in the business press, it lived it, in mortgage payments and grocery bills. If most of your income and most of your savings depend on the same company or even the same industry, you are not an employee with investments. You are Salo in 2012, waiting. The second place is your portfolio, and here the theft is truly silent. Nobody freezes your account. Nobody sends a letter. A safe blue chip simply stops compounding like Venice after 1501, while the world's growth quietly migrates elsewhere. The shareholder who held Nokia from 2007 to 2013 was never robbed on any single day except one. He was robbed a little every quarter by complacency, which is the most patient tax collector of all. Inflation works the same way on cash, a silent tax, a wealth transfer by design rather than accident, and concentration works the same way on portfolios. The unprepared do not lose their savings in a crash. They lose them in a slow leak they were never told to check, and they discover it at the exact moment they need the money, at retirement, when there is no time left to rebuild. Now walk to the edge with me and look down, because you need to see what the bottom looks like. A Nokia assembly line veteran in 2007, 20 years from retirement, holding company stock and a pension invested in the national champion, was on paper one of the safest workers in Europe. By 2013, the stock had lost more than 9/10 of its value, the factory was closed, and the skills of a lifetime were attached to a product category that no longer existed. He did nothing wrong. He simply trusted the surface, like the patricians of Venice, like the shareholders of Western Union. History's ledgers are full of people who did nothing wrong except believe that the present would continue. But the same ledgers, and this is where the audit turns from dread to instruction, record who walked out the other side. In every single case we have excavated today, the Venetian families that survived the spice collapse were, historically, the ones who moved wealth out of the trade routes and into hard, productive assets, the farmland and estates of the Italian mainland, assets that no Portuguese caravel could reroute. Across every debasement, bubble, and collapse in the historical record, the same categories keep surfacing in the hands of the survivors. Physical gold and silver, which no board of directors can mismanage into oblivion. Productive real estate, essential commodities that people must buy in good years and bad. And the Nokia case adds a fourth, and it may be the most important, skills. Because here is the most remarkable artifact in the Finnish wreckage. The engineers walked out alive. Nokia's own bridge program helped departing employees found hundreds of new companies. Former Nokia ecosystem talent fed a Finnish technology renaissance. The game studio Supercell, built with ex-Nokia veterans in its orbit, was later valued in the tens of billions. The corporation died. The competence compounded. Empires can be sold for scrap. A skill in your hands cannot be written down by anyone's board. To be clear, this is historical analysis and education, not financial advice. I am not telling you what to buy. I am showing you what the ledger says survivors held. And the ledger's instruction is consistent across 5 centuries. Do not confuse the size of the incumbent with the safety of your position. Diversify away from any single throne, your employers, your countries, your indexes. Hold some things that cannot be printed, frozen, or discontinued by press release. And treat every official reassurance that the king cannot be caught as what this audit has shown it to be, the most reliable sell signal in economic history. So here is the verdict of this forensic audit. Nokia was not murdered by Apple. Apple merely showed up at the funeral. Nokia was killed from inside by a culture that punished truth, by incentives that paid executives for the present and charged shareholders for the future, and by the oldest illusion in the historical record, the belief that dominance is permanence. The prototype was in the vault. The warnings were in the research. The evidence was buried by the very people paid to read it. And when the platform finally burned, the man holding the match's insurance policy walked away with $25 million while a nation absorbed the loss. That is why this story matters to you tonight in 2026. The wealth transfer from the complacent to the prepared is not some future event to fear. It is the permanent, grinding machinery of economic history. It ran through Venice, through the telegraph wires of New York, through the pine forests of Finland, and it is running right now through the concentrated, confident, record-breaking markets that hold your savings. The only variable the machinery has ever respected is preparation. The unprepared fund the transfer. The prepared receive it. Somewhere in Venice, in an archive, Girolamo Priuli's diary still exists. The entry of a man who saw the empire's death sentence arrive by courier, wrote it down, and watched his city applaud itself for another 100 years. Every era has its Priuli. Every era ignores him. The Forbes cover asked if anyone could catch the cell phone king. No one ever caught him. He fell alone from a throne he was too busy admiring to defend. I am the business archaeologist. The ledger is closed. Stay prepared.